Alright, so next, aside from the article, we're going to talk about another topic called eugenics. And you may have heard of eugenics by another name, or it was used under another name in Germany during World War II. And we know it today as the Holocaust. Okay? Now, prior to World War II, and not long after the end of the Civil War and the abolishment of slavery, eugenics programs started up in the U.S. Quite heavily. And what eugenics is it's the belief and set of practices whereby the reproduction of individuals of certain races with desired traits is greatly encouraged, while the decreasing of individuals of other races deemed unfit with undesired traits is also greatly encouraged. So you can probably guess where I'm going with this. So these desired traits, and by the way, eugenics became majors in the universities. It was studied all over the world in the U.S. and Europe. It was taught all over the world. And so to get back to the desired traits, so these desired traits that these eugenicists came up with all derived from the Nordic and Anglo-Saxon races, okay? Which, if you haven't guessed, are not African races, okay? But that's where these desired traits are supposed to come from. So during these eugenics programs, especially in California and out in Virginia, there was a lot, I mean a lot, of forced and encouraged sterilization of those deemed socially unfit. Now, the socially unfit were deemed socially unfit due to mental retardation because of the intelligence testing. So if their IQ wasn't high enough, they were deemed mentally retarded, which many of those who were tested were African American, obviously, and Negroes from Africa. They weren't mentally retarded. And as you can see from the article, these anthropologists and other scientists made it their work, made it their life's work to portray the Negro as intellectually inferior. So of course now you have eugenics, which makes sterilizing them and basically diminishing their numbers and making their genotype extinct legal and acceptable. So now you have a way to get rid of the blacks in the U.S. Now you have a way. And had this become widespread amongst the Dutch and others, which it was at the time, but had it went into full gear as it did in Germany, you would have seen a lot more of this happening on the continent of Africa. I can promise you that. So prior to World War II, you had the eugenics programs, like I said, in full swing. You had a gentleman by the name of Paul Lombardo, who was a eugenicist, and would make frequent trips to Germany and kind of spread the knowledge of eugenics. It's been reported several times in his work and others' work who would quote Lombardo as him saying that the eugenics got its start in the U.S. long before it became popular in Germany and used by Hitler. Okay. And again, he also would tell colleagues of his whom he worked with that they should be proud, and be able to rest easy because, after his several trips to Germany and seeing, how the eugenics programs were catching on, he would tell them to rest easy knowing that their work is being carried on in Germany. Okay. Now there's another individual, another well-known eugenicist and land developer. He was also known as a philanthropist by the name of Charles M. Goethe. Okay. He was a strong advocate of mandatory, compulsory, okay, sterilization. Not encouraged, but mandatory, okay, of those deemed socially unfit, which we've already talked about who they are. He opposed immigration, into the U.S., warning that it would contaminate the European gene pool. He openly praised Germany for their eugenics and sterilization programs in an effort to purify the Aryan race. He was very outspoken against Asians and Mexicans especially. And he openly, on multiple occasions, just like Lombardo, bragged about how the U.S. was responsible for the influence of eugenics in Germany and its usage. What's funny and very peculiar is that when Hitler went overboard with this, okay, and subjected the Jews to these eugenics programs, then the U.S. wanted to speak out and condemn eugenics, all of a sudden kind of bury it, once they saw what Germany was doing with it. It was okay for them to do it to the Negroes in the U.S., okay? It was okay for them to do it there, okay? Because somehow it was more humane the way we were doing it for some reason, but completely barbaric when we would see others doing it, like with Hitler. So that makes it what we did okay compared to Hitler, apparently. Okay. Not really sure how that makes sense, but okay. Then there's a gentleman you may all know by the name of W.E.B. Du Bois, or Du Bois, depending on how you want to pronounce that, who was a black intellectual during that time period. And he was reported as saying that only the fit blacks should reproduce. I know some of you are thinking, why would a Negro intellectual of that time say that only fit blacks should reproduce? I'll tell you. He believed this because he thought that by doing so and having only the fit blacks reproduce, that they could undo or erase the African race's heritage of moral iniquity. Now, this man is a black intellectual, okay, of his time, okay, meaning W.E.B. Du Bois was very smart, okay, and it is so clear by what he just said there that he's drinking the eugenics Kool-Aid, okay. You have this man convinced that his people have a heritage, a history of moral iniquity. His people were enslaved, beaten, raped, mutilated, murdered for centuries. And he is somehow convinced that his race has a heritage of moral iniquity. Now, my question is, who taught him that? I'll give you three guesses, but you're only going to need one. Okay? You're only going to need one. Now, if it's still not clear that white privilege exists, allow me to continue. So that sums up the more scientific aspect of how white privilege has begun to build, okay, and has already pretty much become a social system at that point. Now, what I'm going to do now is take more of a social stand on this, and I'm going to take you back before the abolishment of slavery, before the development of eugenics programs in the U.S., and take out some excerpts from some of the books that I've been reading, and in specific the classic slave narratives and the story of Gustavus Vasa, which is one of the slaves, and that was the name he was given, if you're wondering why he was named that. So he worked on a number of sailing vessels for a majority of his life. And on one of the vessels, or occasionally on his vessels, he has shipments of slaves that they have to take back and forth, his masters and their crew. And this, what I'm going to be reading you, is some excerpts from what he wrote, having witnessed on the ships, okay? Now, he's talking about now they have a shipment of slaves in their possession, and they're going to be taking these to the U.S. and to Europe, different places in Europe. So he writes, "It was almost a constant practice with our clerks and other whites to commit violent depredations on the chastity of female slaves. I have even known them to gratify their brutal passions with females not 10 years old." And he writes that this has happened quite a bit. "And these abominations, some of them practiced to such scandalous excess that a captain once fired one of the crew that he caught doing it. It was happening so much, he had to fire the damn guy." Wow. Wow. So then he also goes on to say that having made it to port, he saw a Negro man nailed to the ground, and 2 white men were cutting off each of his ears, piece by piece. And they were doing this because he had engaged in sexual acts with a white prostitute, which numerous white sailors had done this with white prostitutes. No charges brought against them, no physical harm brought to them. One Negro man, and it doesn't mention that he's a slave, so he might have been a free man. Regardless, one Negro man engages in sexual acts with a white prostitute, and he's being cut to pieces. Now, there's a document called the Assembly of Barbados. Now, in Act 329, on the 125th page, it states that if any Negro or other slave, under punishment by his master or his order for running away or any other crime, unfortunately shall suffer his life or member, no person shall be liable of fine. Shit gets deeper, dog. If someone should kill a Negro without cause, they shall pay into the public treasury 15 pounds sterling. Now, I'm no currency calculator, and I could really give a shit less what this calculates as in terms of American dollars. But if you don't think that that is white privilege, that a white man can get away with murdering or maiming a Negro or a slave without any fine if it's punishable by his master, then there's a serious problem. If you think that there's nothing wrong with the fact that they have done this for hundreds of years and made it acceptable to kill blacks, with the only penalty being that you pay 15 pounds for taking their life. No jail time, no nothing. You pay 15 pounds and walk away, while they probably bury that man in an unmarked grave.